Go ahead. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our MACAE, the Michigan Adult Community and Alternative Education Association member profile series. I'm Patrick Brown, the Executive Director of MACAE, and we launched this video series just a few months ago to highlight the work of our individual members that they're doing in the alternative community and adult education and integrated education and training space. And this is a video recording that you'll be able to find on our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at MACAE Today, or you can also visit our website at www.macae.org. So we're very excited today to welcome our guest, and that is Pam Gosla. Pam is a familiar face in the education and workforce landscape. And I will not jump ahead of the train here, but she has announced that she's retiring come the end of June of this year. So that is one of the reasons, in addition to her many talents and skills, of why we wanted to highlight her, spotlight her, and interview her for today's MACAE member profile. So welcome, Pam. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
So Pam, we started this video series. I was talking to you a little bit earlier about this. Not only to highlight the work of adult education and workforce development and the professionals that work in the space, but to really tell the story of the professionals that work in this landscape, but also just to tell the stories of individuals that they work with, you know, adults and families all across the state of Michigan, why someone comes into one of our programs, the services that they need, and more broadly, just to understand our association and the wide scope that it reaches, the thousands of individuals, the thousands of members that we've had over, you know, our almost 40-year history. And so it's really kind of it's telling your story, but it's also telling the story of, you know, really a larger landscape. So I just appreciate you taking the time. So why don't you start with telling us a little bit about your background, your history, your education and work experience. How did you come into the education and workforce landscape? Give us the history of your history.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Actually, I fell into working in adult education. I was a mid-year graduate of an adult my educational program from Eastern, and I graduated in December. So finding a position in December is usually very difficult. And so I started working with an adult ed program that was doing credit recovery for individuals that were trying to pick up those last few credits before so they could graduate with their class. And we're talking back in a time when adult education teachers were not even part of a bargaining unit. They weren't really considered teachers. They were kind of like the nuisances that appeared in a classroom from overnight that the day school teachers the next morning had a fit about. So yeah, I was one of those. I tried to remember to erase the boards, but not always. But I was teaching social science, and I was silly enough not to have any coaching experience behind me. So after the end of that school year, finding another teaching position in a traditional K-12 environment was very difficult because most social science instructors were coaches. And I also had this lofty idea that I was going to go to law school. So I was just going to be doing the teaching for a little bit. So decided to continue, and actually Monroe County was in a cooperative organization with Mason Consolidated School and had a consortium. And so I started working in Monroe County doing work with CETA students. Yes, there really was a CETA program, and I can verify it. So there was a large layoff in the auto industry at that time, and so we had a lot of displaced workers. And I walked into a situation where I was actually working with people that were 30 and 40 years old, older than I at the time, who were unable to even do the alphabet. They'd been working on the line, and some of my first students, one of my first students that I will always remember, could not even do the alphabet. And I had been around education all my life because of my parents both being involved in education. And my mother had brought initial teaching alphabet from Europe back into the United States. And so I started using some ITA principles with an individual that had learning disabilities, and all of a sudden he was able to read for the first time. And he picked up a book that we had for kindergartners, and from that point on I was captured for life. To see the joy in his face, and you know, many people, many of the established at that time instructional staff were like, well, how's he going to make the transition to traditional orthography? And I said, does it matter? You know, does it really matter if he can get a hold of a book and he can read some of the words in it? That's what he valued. He was finally a valuable piece of the community and of his family because he could pick out words and he could read. And from that point on, I could never turn my back on an adult learner. It was just there forever.
How did you did you stay in Monroe County then, or had you moved to other parts of Southeast Michigan during your time?
Yeah, I did leave Monroe County. After I helped Bedford get started with one of the first learning labs that the state had, I ended up doing a wonderful thing, and that was getting married. But I married somebody who was in the Navy, and consequently, I went from the Great Lakes to the big ocean because he was a submariner. And I moved to Rhode Island for a year and a half. And then from that point, I started working with Central Texas College as the dean, as a dean of Atlantic programs to put college instructors on Navy vessels
Oh,
and
wow.
Navy ports. And then my husband ended up getting transferred to Hawaii, and their director of Pacific operations had just left. So in going to Hawaii, I actually had to report before he did, and ran the Pearl Harbor Central Texas College campus, and also took care of some of I've been to a few places that you can only get through by being transported on a military vessel and those kinds of things. Even some places that my husband hasn't been able to go. So security clearance and all, I was involved. And then he retired out of Hawaii, and we adopted our daughter from China. And I was a stay-at-home mom for 2 whole years as we got reestablished back in Michigan. And then his company moved him to New Hampshire, and I started working at New Hampshire Community Technical College as a dean for their community education program and workforce development programs. And we did that for 2 years. And then I came back to Michigan to where my heart was.
Wow. And then when you came back to Michigan, did you work at Hillsdale, or where did you come back to?
I actually started with South Central Michigan Works as their special projects manager. And because all the way along, everything that I have done with education, even when it was with Central Texas College, it was helping sailors and helping military members connect with the educational basis necessary for them to achieve their career objective. And I always saw that it was the civic and social responsibility that was truly what my product was to be. It's not the completion of an education, but rather to assist the individual being able to fulfill their community, social, and family responsibilities. And once that finally sunk in, that was always what moved me forward. Education is the tool to gain what they need to be in the position that they civically, socially, and community want to be. And so when the position at South Central opened up for a special projects manager, it kind of just aligned. I'd gotten my master's by that point, and I also had a specialist in online teaching. And so I was able to bring all those things together. And then we had some issues with workforce development in that as we were trying to fulfill our workforce development needs, there were not enough educational providers to be able to get those diplomas and get those GED certificates. So I sat down with Christine Quinn, who was the director at that time, and said, why don't we partner with some of our local high schools to be able to make that work? Since we're the ones that see those individuals looking for positions first. And she thought it was a great idea, and from there we just kind of grew.
Well, you have brought so much to Southeast Michigan in terms of that integration of education and training. We've talked about how oftentimes those two entities have operated in silos and not really understanding how best to intersect and interweave and interwork with one another. And I would attribute that a large majority of your career and how you're recognized in the education workforce landscape is around doing that in a really equitable way that highlights and underscores what you were talking about earlier, the educational foundation that all adult learners need to have, but then also what other opportunities beyond that they can be engaged with, that they can interact with, that they can be enrolled in, to not let that educational achievement be the end all goal. It may be one of their goals, but helping to actualize and realize other things, and then obviously become more civically and socially responsible, as you were talking about earlier. So I want to give you those flowers for that, because I think that is something that you're recognized as a leader in that space and doing that. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your program now at Southeast Michigan Works. Talk about kind of the array of services that are available and how you see that interweaving of the educational component, especially with the adult education, and the workforce development together.
Sure. I really see that education is a tool. It is an essential tool. And it is a mastery of tooldom, so to speak, to meet what one's career objective is or can be. And with that in mind, it becomes the place where we can open the door. It really is the entry. It's not the closing. I see our education department at Southeast Michigan Works as the place where we can take and show the interrelationship between education and one's career goals. When we bring youth in, and our programming goes all the way with in-school youth through Jobs for Michigan Grads, which we've taken and have invested in some of the school systems locally. Through our all of our WIOA programs and up into our dislocated workers and the educational. I feel that the education department needs to be involved in every single step of the way. And fortunately, I've been supported by our directors to understand that. We have Jobs for Michigan grad students that come in through their K-12 system, alternative ed classroom, and we can introduce our workforce development programs to them at the same time that we're also encouraging and supporting them to get that terminal secondary credential. In that mind, they see the importance because they work hand in hand with those individuals that have separated from school prior to getting that secondary credential. And those individuals turn around and tell them, look, it's not that much harder. We invest in them, in our older youth, the fact that you have a story to tell. Whatever made you separate from school, it's your story, but you know the impact that that's had on your life better than anybody else. You need to tell that story. You need to tell it to people who are in that same position of having to make that decision. So by having our education department along with our workforce development department, it helps keep things aligned. It helps keep that camaraderie, and it helps students to provide mutual support to our job seekers at the same time. Our job seekers may not have actually entered our doors with the idea that they were going to get any training or education, but once they see that they can do that at the same time that they're trying to achieve their career goal, they have a tendency to say, you know what? It isn't going to take me that long. I guess I can do it. And I'm going to be this much further ahead. So we have programming from everyone pretty much from 16 on up. We do our English as a second language program. We're getting, actually in all of our centers, we're having a large influx of migrant population. So we are very pleased to help them. But even those individuals that have achieved their secondary credentials, we still help them go through and work with the local community colleges by helping them determine what their career choices are. We do a lot of career aptitude and interest assessments, and then come up with a career plan. How, not just this is what an idea of a career might be, but how are you going to achieve it? What are the benchmarks? What are, maybe you're not going to be able to go ahead and get to be an RN right away. Are there some intermediary steps that you can take that will help you out in your life situation, but yet still get you toward that ultimate goal that you have? And so we become a hand-in-hand partner. So we work a lot with the community colleges to help make sure that we've got that connection built, and also with some of our other post-secondary institutions, our colleges and universities that are included. I think we have a really great working relationship. Many of them have actually started asking us what can they do to help bridge the gap, and by placing us, giving us classrooms, so that it's not a foreign territory for these students. We've had classes on campuses so that they may not be in college yet, but it's just one GED test away. And so they are relaxed to make that change. I'm sorry, I get excited and I get bent off on those sidetracks.
No, I think that you're painting the landscape for us, and I think, like I echo earlier, your story is that much of building those relationships and the partnerships. So let me ask you this question. This wasn't on one of the prepared questions I sent you to think about, but I'm going to throw this out there because I need to glean your wisdom on this in this story is how have you sat down with partners and had those conversations at different times, politically, economically, socially, at different times when it may have been difficult for the partners that you were sitting with to understand their role in this landscape, or that they just wanted to be responsible for one objective. How were you able to kind of bridge that, the personalities and just the climate of those things? Because that, I think, is a lesson in your career as well, is helping to bring people to the table to understand how they actually are part of a larger landscape and not to let them operate in a silo, because it is in the best interest of the people that we're serving, but also for the communities in which we serve too. How generally have you tackled those issues?
There's been a number of ways. I mean, I've been very fortunate in my career because I've served on both the secondary side of things and the post-secondary side of things. So I kind of understand both sides of the issue. And I've come at this particular issue from both sides. I mean, I've had to recruit post-secondary students, and so I have gleaned a bit of understanding what is enticing to a post-secondary situation for both the student and the administration. I've been responsible for the budget. Let's be brutally honest. But it doesn't, I think when it comes to that type of an issue, I just try to put the practicality and the real life scenario in front of them. It doesn't do a post-secondary institution well if someone enters and doesn't complete. It doesn't do a secondary institution well if they get someone through, but they're not prepared to take the next step into post-secondary. So it's a case of let's sit down and find out what we can do that will make all partners happy, and be as effective and efficient with funding, which is the mainstay of a lot of things, let's be honest. And also keeping in mind that we want to take as many barriers away as we possibly can. And I've always been an out of the box thinker. And I guess, hopefully Shamar won't listen to this too much, but I much prefer to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. If I think it's in the best interest of my staff and my students. And I don't make those decisions lightly. I make sure that I do my due diligence and make sure that I check out what truly is impacting them, almost to the point of ad nauseum for some individuals, because I will continually go back and say, all right, now have I covered everything you can think of before I make this move? But I also am very dogged with it. I don't let it lie. If an institution says, I can't do this, or we can't accommodate that, I'll go back and say, all right, what part is not favorable, and let's find another way to go at it. And I'll work at it until I can just find that way. And I will find the impassioned people within those venues and probably be the biggest thorn in their side that they've ever had. But in the end, at the end of the day, it's always got to be what's best for the participant, because ultimately that's what's best for the organization. And that's the bottom line.
No is not in your vocabulary, Pam. I think you hear a no and you think, okay, they're saying not yet. So how do I get them to a yes? So
Yeah, I didn't think of that particular side of it. So let's go look at it again.
yes. So you have announced that you're retiring after a very illustrious career. And with that comes lots of bittersweet feelings from your colleagues that want to celebrate you and want to congratulate you on that, but also a feeling of loss of institutional knowledge, of programming, of leadership, mentorship, wisdom, all of the things that are subscribed to someone who has been dedicated in a profession like this for as long as you have. What are you feeling at this time, and where do you kind of see the future of education and workforce training going over the next decade, 20 years? You've seen a lot of highs and lows over the last few decades in your time in the state of Michigan. Where do you see it kind of going forward?
The one thing I have seen that I absolutely celebrate every single day coming into the office and seeing when it comes to adult education is that there has been tremendous growth. I mean, when I first started in adult ed, you were not a professional. You had sold out. You were not you were not doing justice to your educational training. You were copping out. Today, that is not even a stray thought in somebody's mind. If anything, I see adult educators becoming more and more effective. I think they are living the education dream in that they're forced into circumstance, and by circumstance, they have an opportunity to transcend what their education truly is. They don't implement curriculum, they create curriculum. They don't just take philosophy and practice, they create it. And I am so excited to see that in our adult education. When I see new educators coming into our MACAE meetings or see them at the conferences, and I see that light bulb turn on in them, it just makes me explode. I just get so happy because I think I worry about K-12 education a little bit because everything kind of gets dumped, and there's so much that I don't think we're always preparing teachers the best way possible to think beyond what the prepared program says. Because of circumstance, an adult educator has to. They get everything from, if they've got 16 people in a class, they have 16 different curriculums they've got to put together. They have 16 different issues they've got to take and tackle, and they're not going to do a standard one-size-fits-all curriculum. And that is what a true educator wants. They want that challenge, I'm convinced. And as we move forward, I just see that adult education may actually have even greater influence on K-12 education because because of some of the disruptions we've had, especially of late with COVID and that type of thing, I think those practices that adult educators have just innately known, people are going to start looking at that and they're going to say, how did you know how to do that? Or how do you do this? And it's going to get inculcated back into the K-12 environment. And I think that's really exciting. And I think if we just keep explaining to people that they can't have work and career success without educating being there hand in hand, I think it's getting through. It's kind of burrowing a little bit, but I think it really is getting through. And I can only see that it's going to get better.
It's very inspiring, Pam. Thank you for, I was inspired by what you were saying, and I hope others that are listening will hear that too. So, last question for our time together. What is there like a mantra or a saying or something that you have done to remind yourself to keep going? You know, the work that we do is so complex sometimes. There are many nuances. Is there something that in the highs of highs and in the challenging times as well, working with learners, writing new grants, you know, all of the things that come with those opportunities, is there something that you've kind of clung on to or individuals that you've relied on to help move through those spaces?
This is going to be really silly, but with my very first adult ed classroom, especially when I was teaching entry ABE, lowest level ABE, I had a jar on my desk, and it was the can't jar. And every time somebody told me they can't, they had to take and put a token in that jar. And if we didn't have a dozen tokens by the end of the week, then I bought pizza on the last day of the week. But if there were more than a dozen tokens, then nobody got anything. I refuse to allow my students and myself to ever say, I can't do something. I may not know how, I may not know why, but I certainly can learn how to do it. But I will never accept can't.
That's really touching and inspiring. And I just think is a good end note for this interview. And I think highlights the wonderful professional you are and the career that you've had and how you've brought that to the many leadership spaces and educational spaces that you've been a part of. So thank you for sharing that story. That's very powerful and touching. And I just want to thank you for spending time with us today and sharing your story.
Well, thank you. It's hard. It's bittersweet.
Absolutely. Well, we thank you, Pam. We send you our best and thank you so much for your time and thank you for your career. We've still got some months to go, so there's still plenty of time to celebrate and to get more wisdom from you. But we just thank you for this time in this catalog, not only of our history, but of your profile. So thank you so much for that. You can watch this episode again on our social media pages when we drop it on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at MACAE, MACAE today, as well as our website, www.macae.org. We will see you next time. And thanks again, Pam, for your time.
Thank you.